Well, today I hope to take a bit of a moment to do a better video than I did yesterday, one that included far more content than just pointing out the most superficial of things that took place during the whole situation. Now, what I'd like to do is look a little bit deeper into the events that transpired with the whole situation between Trayvon Martin and Zimmerman. Now, the first thing I want to look at is blatant media bias that was apparent to everyone, but a lot of people refused to see. Trayvon Martin, from the outset, was portrayed a particular stereotypical way in the media of being some kind of a usual criminal black youth. Many facts were taken out of context and twisted to mean a particular thing. And this was widespread throughout the media. This was by no means isolated to just simply, far-right websites and news outlets like Fox News. Some of this was coming from very center, even coming from so-called liberal sources. One of those things was taking his school record and completely taking it out of context to portray Trayvon Martin in a particular way, noting that he had been suspended a number of times from school, and that supposedly this meant that he was a bad kid, and that we shouldn't believe his story, and that Zimmerman was rightful in killing him. Well, in fact, those suspensions were for non-violent issues like truancy and possession of marijuana, none of which of these are an actual crime, or really anything outside of what any other teenager does. On the other hand, a completely different picture was portrayed of Zimmerman. He actually had more than one run-in with the police, more than one run-in with the law, including overspeeding, what's called tussling with a police officer, and reported alleged acts of domestic abuse. In 2005, Zimmerman was arrested and charged with resisting officer with violence and battery of law enforcement officer. Both of these felonies are considered third degree. Due to his desperate attempts, the charges were reduced to resisting officer without violence, and then only remaining charge was also completely waived off when he entered an alcohol education program. In the same year, 2005, Zimmerman's ex-fiancée, Veronica Zuzau, filed a civil motion for restraining order alleging domestic violence. In retaliation, Zimmerman filed for a restraining order against Zuzau, and both of these claims were resolved with both restraining orders granted. The next year, in 2006, Zimmerman was charged with speeding. However, that case was dismissed because the officer who charged him failed to show up at court. So we can see when we look at it, it was not really balanced coverage, but we already knew that coming from bourgeois media. Now, one of the things that went on that people denied was that Zimmerman is racist. They said that there was no evidence that he had gone after Trayvon Martin because he was black, and that there was no evidence that Zimmerman himself was actually racist. But when we actually look at the case and we see what happened, what was said, we get a bit of a different story from that. Now, Zimmerman's lawyer said that Zimmerman followed him for two reasons. One, he said he was doing suspicious things, like looking in people's windows, which was one of the things that he said. Yet at no point was any evidence of this brought forward whatsoever. This is merely just Zimmerman's word that Trayvon was acting in a suspicious manner, which we now know very likely never happened, considering that he was just going out to get some food and coming back. There was no reason to think that he was doing anything suspicious whatsoever, and if it was true, he would have presented something to indicate that. Now, the other thing he said was that the previous incidents of breaking and entering inside that community were done by young black males. So that's why Zimmerman chose to follow Trayvon. And he had said on the phone, "These fucking punks always get away." Now, if he's referring to those individuals, those young black males who did commit those crimes, why is he automatically assuming Trayvon is one of them? Why is he referring to him? In his mind, he had found one of those people. He believed that he was following them, and he had no reason to believe that, because he had not done anything, or at least can't prove that he did anything whatsoever to be suspicious where Zimmerman would think that he was one of those kids who did that. Instead, he just automatically assumed this because Trayvon Martin is black. Now, if it were not for Zimmerman's automatically biased racial assumption that Trayvon Martin was up to no good when he had no reason to think so, Trayvon Martin would still be alive today. and George Zimmerman would still be walking the streets of his neighborhood playing wannabe cop, walking around looking for black people to call the police on. I think it's very interesting to note that no one at this trial seemed to consider that Trayvon Martin might have been standing his ground. After all, Trayvon Martin wasn't doing anything. Then he was literally just walking to the store and back and saw this guy, spying on him, looking at him from behind things and following him in a car or whatever the story is. Wouldn't you think that maybe he'd start to get a little suspicious of this happening and think there's probably a chance that this guy's up to no good and is going to do something to him? Thus, Trayvon Martin's reaction might have been to defend himself when Zimmerman came up to him. But nobody's thinking that. Nobody is thinking whether or not Trayvon Martin had any reason to stand his ground, which is a legal right. No one's considering that. And in fact, we can see a definite trend where black people have been killed in supposed justified incidences just like this, demonstrating that white people have the right to stand their ground and black people don't. Let us consider the case of Marissa Alexander. Was she not the woman who also was in a stand your ground situation where she claimed that she was attempting to defend herself from a brutal beating that was coming by her husband, who she had reported in the past, so allegedly had already committed violent acts against her? She had a firearm. She fired 2 warning shots inside of her own home. Not in public like Zimmerman did, in her own home. She did not shoot anyone. It was shown that she was firing to try to scare the guy away to leave, not shoot to kill as Zimmerman did. Yet, when she was using a firearm to scare somebody off in a stand your ground situation, she was given 20 years in prison for that. Is there something just a little bit strange here? He kills somebody in a situation that, frankly, he caused. He did cause that situation to happen. He walks. This woman is trying to defend herself. She gets 20 years in prison, although nobody was actually hurt. This is disgraceful. And the only reason it happened was because she is black. Now, this is not an isolated incident. Data that has been made public and PBS has done an investigation into shows that these types of stand your ground laws have been a tremendous pain for black people, and that this has been used to justify the murders of a lot of African Americans. And in fact, them as a victim have been singled out, although this has gone seemingly completely unnoticed. At Frontline's request, Roman analyzed the pool of 43,500 homicides by race in states with stand your ground laws and those without them, because he wanted to control for multiple variables: the races of the victims and the shooter, whether they were strangers, whether they involved in firearm, or whether the murderers were in stand your ground law states. Roman used a technique known as regression analysis, which is a statistical tool used to analyze the relationship between different pieces of data. Using this analysis, Roman found that a greater number of homicides were found justified in the stand your ground law states in all racial combinations, a result he believes is because of those states yielded more killings overall. Roman also found that stand your ground laws tended to track the existing racial disparities in homicide convictions across the U.S., with one significant exception. Whites who kill blacks in stand your ground law states are far more likely to be found justified in their killings. In non-stand your ground law states, whites are 250% more likely to be found justified in killing a black person than a white person who kills another white person. In stand your ground law states, that number jumps to 354%. You can see the breakdown of the killings in this chart. The figures represent the percentage likelihood that the deaths will be found justifiable when compared to white-on-white killings, which was the basis Roman used for comparison. So as we can see, there is definitely a racial bias in stand your ground laws that are terribly stacked against black people, particularly black males. And this is the same attitude coming out of the post-slavery era. And what a lot of people, particularly racists, tend to forget is that even when slavery was officially abolished, there was tremendous what one can only describe as terrorism carried out against the black population. It was not uncommon to randomly walk up and kill black people and suffer no consequences. There are stories of black people who simply whistled at a white woman and then found himself lynched and tortured just because of that. There are many stories of this happening for a long time. In fact, it was frequently not even considered a crime to kill a black person. Now, this is that same mentality being left over from this era. Now, this whole situation, specifically the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman situation, but the situation of race in the United States, the West, but more so in the United States than others, is about contradiction. Because of the social construct of race, people believe that there are differing interests between blacks and whites. So there is a contradiction. Now, there are definite inequalities that come from material things. These material things cause the antagonism that make the contradiction. That is not to say there are no problems. That is not to say black people don't have the short end of the stick or anything like that, because that is definitely the case. What we see is a system of inequality creating those antagonisms that create the system, that create the contradiction. So these things that happen in society, largely due to people's perception, due to historical inequalities that cause those perceptions, we have the situation the way it is today. Because of disparities in wealth, because of disparities in living standards, because of all kinds of disparities between blacks and whites, we have the situation as it is. And that contradiction causes the system that we have. Thus, the only solution to ending a problem between the races is to end that contradiction. And the only way we can do so is by transforming not only ourselves, but the material conditions in which we live. This is all made the way it is because of the system that we live in, because of capitalism. This is by no means unique to capitalism, and other systems have had this same contradiction in the past. But we do live in capitalism and must understand this problem from the perspective of capitalism. This system needs us to be divided. We absolutely must, in all times, be separated from each other. Capitalist ideology tells us that we're all unique individuals and that nobody can really get us, and that we are so different from everybody else. Thus, we must forge out on our own to do our own thing, and to hell with everybody else, because they cannot stand us. They cannot understand us, and that they must invariably be our enemy because of it, and that we all must fight for our own interests, and that every individual is his own unique little thing, when that's not the way it is at all. Capitalism must, in every way, shape, and form, insist upon this idea being spread across the entire society, and in fact across the entire globe. We should not be surprised at all that this makes racism a much worse problem than it is. We should not be surprised at all that this idea that racism would be pushed by this kind of mentality. And two, this system needs us, the working class, divided. We must be fighting against each other over every single little thing. Because if the working class came together, organized, and fought for its collective interest, this system wouldn't stand, and it wouldn't last. That is what they fear the most, is a united working class overall, one that is capable of toppling the entire system and taking away the unjust wealth and power the ruling elite actually have. This is what they are afraid of. This is why they invent reasons for us to be afraid of each other. This is why they invent reasons for us to be against each other. They are afraid of that unity. They are afraid of what we can accomplish if we are all united together. And unfortunately, because of this system, incidents like what happened with George Zimmerman are going to continue to happen. In fact, very likely long into the future. A system, and this is a message to the liberals out there. If you ever wonder why, no matter what you do, you can't create equality between whites and blacks, well, let me give you a little hint as to why that is. Capitalism, the system you defend, is a system that is entirely predicated on and needs inequality. You should not be sitting there scratching your head, wondering why there's inequality in a system that literally is inequality.